Hello, and thank you for watching. My name is Bradford Roberts, Principal Broker, Founder, and Owner of TR Realty in the Las Vegas area. After watching this video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. Download the pertinent handouts for this video by clicking the link in the comments below. Now let's get started.
Hello everybody, I'm Kyle Wallace from Driggs Title. Today I'm participating in this class just to talk to you quickly about how to understand and read a settlement statement and CD, or closing disclosure. So it's going to be really important that you click on the link to download the information. I'm going to go through a little presentation, PowerPoint presentation, so you can follow along in the slides to see what I'm talking about in each section. So on the second slide, you'll see a general example of what a settlement statement looks like. This is the thing you'll see most thoroughly and most often throughout a real estate transaction, the settlement statement. The settlement statement's easy to read. It's broken into different parts that we'll look at. Here on the settlement statement that is appearing, or that you have on the link itself, is a settlement statement that contains both the buyer and seller side information for a real estate transaction. On the third slide, you'll see that we've highlighted the top portion of the settlement statement. This is where you find the general information regarding real estate transactions. As you can see, it includes the buyer and seller information, the property address, it includes escrow number, and closing date. It's important when you're looking at this portion of the settlement statement that you verify the closing date. There are things that can change, charges that can be altered based on when a closing date is. So it can affect the fees to your buyer or seller. In the third slide, you'll see I've highlighted the portions of the settlement statement that outline the buyer and seller charges and credits. In this example, the buyer debits and credits appear on the right, the seller debits and credits appear on the left. It's important to verify that the charges under the contract are charged to the correct party, such as home warranty. That's a big one. As you know, home warranties can be negotiable in a contract. Sometimes the buyer pays for them, sometimes the seller pays for them. When you get this settlement statement, it's going to be important to verify that it's on the correct side of the settlement statement. On slide 4, we've highlighted throughout, and we'll go through these sections. There are several sections on the settlement statement that lay out the charges and descriptions for the charges that are charged to either the buyer or the seller. There are several things that you want to pay attention to here. On the sixth slide, you'll see we've highlighted the first portion. The first portion contains the purchase price, as well as the earnest money deposit amounts and any loan amount that may be credited to your buyer. Seventh slide, we've moved on to the lender section. In the lender fees, this is a breakdown of the loan costs that your buyer will be charged throughout the process of the loan. These are fees that are neither set by the title company nor by you. They are fees that are charged by the lender. I would always say that if you ever have a lender question or a question on lender's fees, or your buyer or seller have a question on lender's fees, those are referred directly back to the lender. Those are charges for them to explain that they control. In the eighth slide, or the next section you'll see, is the title and escrow charges. Title and escrow charges should automatically be calculated by the title or escrow company on the settlement statement when they have prepared it. Those are charges easily verified. Title and escrow charges are followed by commissions. So this is clearly an important one for agents. You'll want to make sure that the commissions are charged to the correct party. I've seen instances where a buyer has agreed to pay their own commission. Customarily, the seller pays the commission, but we've seen times where it's been charged to a buyer, so it needs to be on the correct side of the settlement statement. I've also seen instances where a commission was supposed to be reduced because the seller had given some credit to the buyer, and so it wasn't an exact calculation. It's important to make sure that those percentages match up. This section does not include any transaction fees that are charged. Those come later. In the 10th slide, you will see the transfer tax and recording fees. These are fees that are charged to the state, paid directly to the state. These are non-negotiable. And when I say non-negotiable, what I mean is those are set by the state. They can't be waived. They can't be changed. They are exactly what they are to be. Now, they can be negotiated between buyer and seller on which side it's supposed to be charged on, but those fees are set by the state. In the 11th slide, we know there's a last few sections we'll look at, this includes the payoff information. On the example that I've put up, there was no payoff. And so it's blank. We also have miscellaneous charges, and miscellaneous charges is where you will find things like home warranties, where you will find things like your transaction fee. And for both buyer and seller, it will be important to make sure that those charges are, again, charged appropriately, that they're included. If you don't see it, it doesn't exist. The nice thing about a settlement statement is it's going to have all of the charges that are charged to both the buyer and the seller. There are many instances when you will receive maybe just a buyer side settlement statement or just a seller side settlement statement. Your escrow company can certainly send you both sides, and you'd want to ask for it just to make sure that fees are reflected correctly. There is, as I've said most often, a situation where a seller's paying commission, and if you get a buyer side only settlement statement, you're not going to see that a commission's charged, so you would be unable to verify the correct figures. In the 12th slide, of course, is the final numbers. It's going to reflect what the total costs are. The total costs are going to include any closing costs, all the purchase price, and it's going to show you on the very last line what your seller is to receive in proceeds or what your buyer is to bring in closing funds. Sometimes they can get money back if they've already funded or overfunded. Some loans permit them to get their earnest money back. But those are numbers to confirm. You'll see at the bottom that it says to seller from borrower. It could also say from seller to borrower, depending on who has to bring in money to close. And we've seen instances where any of those things can be incorrect. On the 13th slide, I would tell you, this is simple. It says the seller CD should exactly reflect the same figures as the settlement statement with some additional information. Right? So as we're talking about CDs compared to settlement statements, the settlement statement is simply just a reflection of the numbers of what the costs are and what the fees are, what people have to bring in, or what they're going to get back in proceeds. CD includes more information. So as you look at the CD on the 14th slide, CDs will be multiple pages. When we're looking at a CD in particular, we're talking about a buyer CD and a seller CD. Those are generated by different people at different times. The CD that we're looking at now is the seller CD. Seller CDs are always generated by the title company. It is like a settlement statement. The figures should reflect the figures on the settlement statement. But because it's coming from a seller, there's limited information. You are not going to see the buyer fees here. You're only going to see the seller fees. The seller is not entitled to see what the buyer is paying in their fees or for their loan. So they don't receive a copy of it. So as you're looking at this CD, on the next slide, slide 15, you'll see that the beginning of it looks to contain the same information as the settlement statement. It contains the address, the buyer and seller names, the closing date, the sales price. But it also includes what's called the disbursement date, which the settlement statement does not. The settlement statement shows that you have the date that it was printed and the date that it's closing. Here in particular, it can reflect the disbursement date, which can be different than the closing date. There are times that you're going to disperse on a different day than the closing. It can happen a day or two later. Most times those dates are going to be the same. In the 16th slide, you'll see the summary of the transaction. So the first page of the CD or closing disclosure starts with the end of the settlement statement. In other words, it's a summary of the transaction. The summary is going to show what the closing costs are to the seller, how much they've sold their property for, and how much proceeds they're going to get back. You'll see there's a checkbox at the bottom of the highlighted section that shows from or to seller. If they have to bring in money, the checkbox is going to say from instead of to. In this instance, the seller would be getting back $417,000. Continuing on to the 17th slide, and different than the settlement statement, this section contains the information or contact information for both buyer and seller brokers, right, which is often referred to as listing broker and selling broker, as you know. It also contains the settlement agent information, and that's just for quick reference. If someone needs to call someone, if your buyer or seller needs to call someone in the future, they have the information right on the top of that sheet. And that is not reflected anywhere on the settlement statement outside of the title company information. So if they have a question in the future and they want to call their real estate agent, they can certainly look it up on this form. One of the nice things is there was some statistics released not too long ago, several years back, where they said that 97% of people would use their real estate agent a second time, but only 8% remembered who their name, or who they were, or what their name was. So something like this that is actually beneficial to the agent, but it's also a call out to you to say, hey, make sure you're staying in touch with people after they close a real estate transaction. On the 18th slide, you'll see the second page of the breakdown of closing costs on the transaction on a seller CD. This contains the transaction fees with the commission. Now remember to make sure there's that all other charges are reflected correctly, including, like I said, the home warranty, like I mentioned several times, as well as the homeowners association fees or anything else that may have been reflected on the settlement statement. When you get a CD, a seller CD, you should also get a settlement statement. They should come together. You'll get the settlement statement in advance, of course, including both buyer and seller sides. So as you're looking at it, make sure those numbers match up appropriately. Like I said, you're not going to see the charges that are supposed to be on the buyer side. So if there is a charge that was charged to the buyer instead of the seller according to the contract, it's not going to be reflected in these charges, so you need to make sure that it's on the settlement statement. On slide 18, the last document that we're going to explore is the buyer CD. Right? It's the CD that's produced by the lender directly for the buyer. You will not see this document in advance. This is a document that is sent directly to the buyer that they have to sign several days in advance and then sent to the escrow company to make sure their figures match. When they match those figures up, the settlement company will put them on the settlement statement, and you can see that they're reflected correctly there. The buyer CD does contain quite a bit more information. If you flip to slide 20, you will see a sample of a closing disclosure. This is the sample that was actually provided by the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau, the people who instituted the requirement of the closing disclosure. It has a great deal of information that's not reflected on other documents. And again, it's likely that the first time you'll see this document is if you come to closing with your buyer. In the 21st slide, you'll see that the first section of the closing disclosure, or the buyer's closing disclosure, contains the same information that we have been talking about on all the other documents. The property address, the buyer's name, the seller's name. It also includes lender information or loan information, including the loan number and the interest rate, what kind of loan it is. That's important to your buyer as they move forward, but it may not be as important to you. If there's a question on any of the loan terms, of course, again, always refer back to the loan officer. They are the ones to cover it. On slide 22, we've highlighted the area where we've broken down some very valuable information you'll find on the CD. This is the section that includes the loan amount, the interest rate, what the principal and interest payment is. It's also going to disclose whether there's a prepayment penalty or balloon payment. If you don't know, a prepayment penalty is a charge that a lender can charge you if you pay extra or early. So if you pay the loan off early or if you make extra payments, there are some loans that require that you pay a fee for that. So it's important to see that, disclosed here, whether it says yes or no, there's a prepayment penalty. These are uncommon now, but what's nice about the closing disclosure is that it's reflected very clearly. It also discloses whether there's a balloon payment. As you know, a loan that's fully amortized has the same payments throughout the loan process from beginning to end, whether it's 15 or 30 years. Payment 1 to 360 are the same amount, and they reduce the principal and interest at varying rates over time. Balloon payments mean that you may pay on a loan for 5 years, and then it's going to come due with a big payment at the end. And so it's going to disclose whether this is balloon payment or fully amortized. In slide 22, we've highlighted the area that breaks down the payment, or the full payment, including mortgage insurance and estimated escrow or impounds. We refer to this as escrow or impounds. It's not the same as the escrow or title company that's closing your documents. These are fees or amounts held by the lender for payment of taxes and insurance. if it's required as part of the loan, or if your buyer has opted into using them as part of the loan. In this instance, you can see two different payments over time. This is the result of mortgage insurance. Generally, when a buyer is buying a property and they don't have enough money down, less than 20% in equity down on the property, many lenders will require mortgage insurance. That mortgage insurance then goes away over time after they reach the equity requirement of 20 or 25%, depending on what it is. So what you'll see here is two different payments from years 1 to 7 and years 8 to 30, where the payment goes down once the mortgage insurance goes away. Lastly, what you're going to see is the total closing costs with the buyer, along with the amount they need to bring in. This is slide 24. In some instances, the amount they're going to get back. Right, so you'll see the total closing cost for the buyer as well as what cash they need to close. These numbers should match the settlement statement numbers, but don't always. The closing disclosure by the buyer can be an estimate or can be a revision of an estimate. The settlement statement is usually the last or final figure. Sometimes the lender will do what's called a post-close disclosure, meaning something changed on the settlement statement and they're going to disclose it after the closing. And there are only very limited circumstances in which they can do that. On the 25th slide, we've switched to pages 2 and 3. I've highlighted the area where we disclose the buyer and seller costs or fees, and it will break down. In this instance, the buyer now is on the left and the seller's on the right. It will show them who is paying what fees, including loan fees, all the same things that we looked at in the settlement statement and the seller CD. In the 26th slide, you're going to see other loan information. These are pages 4 and 5 of this buyer CD. The buyer CD is a 5-page document. It's almost always a 5-page document. Sometimes it can go into 6 pages, but it's always going to be 5 pages. On page 4 and 5, it's going to show you whether the loan's assumable, whether there's any late payment penalties or how the late payments are handled. It's also going to show you the lender information or how they can get in touch with how your buyer can get in touch with the lender. And it's also going to reflect the signatures. Again, this can be a final or revised version of the settlement statement. In slide 27, there's a couple of things that I would like to stress, and that is when there is no loan, there is no CD. There is no closing disclosure. Anything that is a cash transaction does not come with a closing disclosure. That is for lenders only to better disclose the closing costs according to a lender. So no loan, no CD. You're just going to get a settlement statement. Agents are provided the settlement statement. It's important to review that in advance. That's the final document. On slide 28, there's one other thing that I would like to stress, and that is when you are preparing for closing, or when you're preparing your buyer for closing and they have to bring in funds to close, there is a difference between the funds. Not all funds are created equal. And there are several things that I've highlighted here, one being ACHs. These are automated clearinghouse transactions. This is like a credit card payment. If your buyer initiates an ACH, which some banks will let you do online, the money cannot be sourced. And when we say sourced, what we mean is you can't identify where the funds came from or who they came from. No title company can accept these. The problem with these funds are that they could come from a drug dealer. They could come from a terrorist. They could come from anywhere. So title companies don't accept them. Lenders don't accept them. They get sent back. Make sure that your buyer understands that they have to send a wire, not an ACH. Wires, of course, can be sourced. They come through the Federal Reserve. They're cleared. They're quick. Always make sure you verify your wire instructions with your title company. There has been a tremendous amount of wire fraud, over 26 billion in the last couple of years. So make sure you're confirming that information. And then, of course, checks can always be used for closing funds. However, there are some limitations to checks. A cashier's check is going to take 48 hours to clear, meaning you have to bring it in 2 days in advance. And a regular personal check is going to take up to 10 days. But remember, most title companies aren't going to accept a personal check for more than just a couple of $1,000s. So they'll need to get a cashier's check or pursue something else. On slide 29, the last thing I'm going to stress is that the closing is the culmination of all your work. You need to be there. You need to be there to answer questions for your customers. You need to be there to participate, make sure they're bringing their driver's license, make sure they're bringing any other information that they may need at that closing, but you're going to be there to answer those questions or help them through the process. And when you do that, they're going to come back to you, in the future. That information is going to be right there on that closing disclosure. So I appreciate your time, and I'll turn back over to the next section.
I would like to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was informative for you. If you are licensed with another brokerage in Southern Nevada and would like to talk with me, please text me or visit our website. See you next time.